This is Climate on the Edge, where we explore the frontier of climate interventions and dive into the bold ideas that could shape our planet's future. And I'm Susan Sue.
Captura removes CO2 out of the ocean to allow the ocean to remove CO2 out of the air. CO2 comes out of the atmosphere and we produce a stream. It can then get sequestered underground or used to make products. But the ocean remains unaffected.
Hey everyone. I recently attended the Carbon Removal Capital Summit, a joint production between XPRIZE and the major global bank Santander. It was an awesome opportunity to get to flag down some pioneering XPRIZE finalists and hear more about their work. In this interview, I speak with Steve Oldham, co-founder and CEO of Captura. Steve is a big deal, and so is Captura. Steve was previously the CEO of Carbon Engineering, an early direct air capture pioneer and the only carbon removal company to have had an exit when it was acquired by Occidental Petroleum for $1.1 billion in 2023 to form the foundation of Occidental's plans to build 100 DAC plants by 2035. Now, Steve is heading up the best-funded direct ocean capture company and one of the best-funded carbon removal companies, period, in the world. Steve has forgotten more about carbon removal than the rest of us will ever know. So a solution's got to be a pretty big deal to get someone of his stature and experience to switch methodologies and put his weight behind ocean carbon removal. Steve talks to me about why Captura and why now, and shares his views on carbon removal as humanity's climate plan B, and on what a potential plan C could be. It was humbling and eye-opening to get to learn about not just ocean carbon removal, but also about the systems nature of the climate problem itself from a true legend. I hope you enjoy this chat with Steve Oldham, co-founder and CEO of Captura. All right, Steve, please say your name, your role in the company.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Oldham. I'm the CEO of Captura.
Steve, such an honor to have you with us. So awesome. Can you please tell us in one line, what does Captura do?
Captura removes CO2 out of the ocean to allow the ocean to remove CO2 out of the air.
Give us a little bit more detail on how that mechanism works.
A lot of people don't fully understand this, but they see the implications of it. So the ocean and the atmosphere are actually in equilibrium with respect to CO2. Every time we emit CO2 into the atmosphere, the ocean absorbs its share, about 30%. And people know this because they hear of ocean acidification, blanching of the coral reefs, ocean warming, which creates climate conditions and extreme weather events. So that's a well-known phenomenon. It's explained by something called Henry's Law for the chemists in the audience. So what we do is we use that equilibrium. We take CO2 out of the ocean. And when we do that, we create again a disequilibrium. And so the atmosphere puts the CO2 back into the ocean that we took out. So the net result of all of this, CO2 comes out of the atmosphere and we produce a stream. It can then get sequestered underground or used to make products. But the ocean remains unaffected. So it's really quite a cool mechanism. We're able to use the natural carbon removal properties of the ocean and utilize them to help get us out of this climate crisis.
What was the key insight from your past experience that led you to pursue direct ocean capture versus perhaps other pathways or even other climate interventions?
Yeah, so I actually used to run a direct air capture company, one of the sort of the original direct air capture companies called Carbon Engineering. And for me, what attracted me to Captura was the fact the ocean already exists. We need to do carbon removal at massive scale. The ocean is doing that for us. It's already covering 70% of the surface of the planet. And if we can use that effectively, we already have the scale we need. We're here at the XPRIZE conference. We've heard a lot of discussion about how we need a huge volume of carbon removals. So using the thing that covers 70% of the surface of the ocean, it's already there, really makes a lot of sense.
Steve, I have so many questions I want to ask you, and I'm going to go ahead and get some of the awkward ones out of the way in rapid fire. So you worked with David Keith.
Yep.
And when you look out over if you peer over the edge of the future and you look at the things that are really far out there, but may be necessary, what do you think is being underestimated today that you think will be a reality in the future? And specifically, the reason why I bring up David Keith is because of all of his work in solar radiation modification. You guys have you've both split off from carbon engineering and done really different things. What are your thoughts on what those interventions might be in your crystal ball of the future? And why have you chosen to hitch your wagon to this one?
Good question. I've long been a believer in just about everything I do, not just in business, but also in my private life. It's always good to have at least three plans: a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. The way that I look at climate was when people started worrying about carbon emissions in the past, the logical answer was stop emitting. And as the IPCC, and I think most people now recognize, we're too late for that. We've built too much CO2 into the atmosphere. So we need a plan B. So in my view, carbon removal is a plan B. Problem with plan Bs, they often become plan As. We are very wise as a society to be developing as many forms of carbon removal as we can because we now need that plan B. Plan A didn't work. We didn't stop emissions fast enough. So we need plan B. What David and others are working on, in my view, is a plan C. If we can't get carbon removal done fast enough and we're in a real crisis, you need a plan C. And things like solar radiation management are, in my view, my personal view, a plan C. We could potentially go to those technologies if we needed them, but better to do plans A and B first.
One of the challenges for me personally as an observer in this space is the disconnect between public perception of where we are on these potential solutions, and very much emphasis on the word potential, and where the solutions themselves actually are. What do you think we need to do to close that gap? And I guess, how do you reconcile that challenge between folks and even policymakers thinking, oh, carbon removal will just fix this, which we know due to the carbon cycle, the length of time that happens, whether you're talking about land sinks or ocean sinks, and even if we get to zero, the oceans are still going to release heat
Yeah.
that they've been
And
so
CO2.
graciously, and CO2 that they've been so graciously taking care of for us for over 100 years. So, how do you personally approach that? Maybe even within the Captura context, but also beyond.
Yeah. So again, I'm a strong believer that we need a range of solutions due to the complexity of the problem. Um, and we can't rely on a single solution. I find it very frustrating when occasionally the carbon removal industry fights among itself. Rock-based removal is better than land-based removal, is better than technology, whatever the arguments are. We're going to need all of those things, and we're going to need them at huge scale. I think the public perception challenge it's a difficult one to overcome. I get frustrated when people say to me, the whole world's capacity of carbon removal is 20 seconds worth of emissions today. Yes, but in the 1960s, the whole world's computing capacity was probably in 3 rooms. And now you're holding a phone in front of me. We all have this technology available. You have to start somewhere and you have to develop these things as quick as you can. We have to have storytellers in this industry, as well as scientists and oceanographers and environmentalists. We need storytellers because so far, collectively, the carbon removal industry is yet to convince the public that this technology is on the right track. Now, I also do not believe carbon removal is the single answer. It is not the magic bullet. It is one of a series of solutions. We need to cut emissions as fast as possible. We need to work out solutions where we can replace fossil fuels, and we need to do carbon removal. And maybe one day, maybe we'll have to do some of those geoengineering type solutions too.
I would argue that carbon removal is geoengineering in many ways. It's a slippery slope. We're doing all of these modifications. We're creating interventions on land and in the sea, and we're changing the way the carbon cycle works. We're accelerating it, we're enhancing it. And I guess it depends on how you define geoengineering. But
Yes.
in the broadest definition, we've been doing it for a very long time to, in some cases, unintended ends. And now we're trying to take control of what those consequences are. But to me, it's a little bit of a red herring to classify geoengineering just as the most far out things because it's actually really a spectrum, and I to think about interventions on a spectrum basis
Uh-huh.
as well, including what you're doing with Captura as well as others here at the summit. Um, but it's really what does that portfolio look like?
So again, I agree always on the portfolio. My definition of the difference in geoengineering and carbon removal, in my mind, carbon removal is something you can turn off. So Captura's technology, my previous company, Carbon Engineering, you could turn off those machines if you had discovered that either you went too far or there was unintended consequences you didn't see that, you can turn them off. Geoengineering, in my view, would be things that you can do that you can't necessarily turn off. You're committed to them. So I personally, my line is there. If you can turn it off, then you have the ability to shut it down and you have the ability to prevent unintended consequences. If you can't do it, I think you're heading into geoengineering, and that's where obviously you need more research and more work. I'm not in that space myself, but that's why I would disagree with you, and everybody has their opinion, that carbon removal is a form of geoengineering. Certainly, the technological forms of carbon removal, like Captura, like carbon engineering before it, that can be turned off. Yeah, now you have a way of halting whatever path you may have inadvertently go on.
Thanks. That's a great perspective. You mentioned the infighting within the carbon removal community, and I think that's interesting. I personally think it may be one of these results of small pie mentality or kind of a result of scarcity or the perception of scarcity, particularly when it comes to capital. Now, Captura has not had that problem. You've really defied gravity in terms of being able to raise capital and from some of the best deep tech investors out there. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that and what you think made Captura succeed where other companies that are either in your peer set today or looking to follow in your footsteps might be missing.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. One of the panels today, one of the judges for the XPRIZE gave what I thought was a really good summary about what was needed for companies in this sector to succeed. He talked about, and I agree with all of this, a company has to have credibility. You can have a great idea, but if you don't have the skills to implement and a plan as to how you're going to deploy, no use having a great idea. Equally, you may have all the skills in the world to deploy, but you don't have a great idea. It's not scientifically robust enough. So for me, I think what Captura has been able to do is we come from Caltech. So the science behind what we do is clear. I'd like to think that myself and other senior people on the team have some credibility in building this industry in the past. So people have confidence we can deploy. And then we have a very rigorous piloting program designed to show our technology evolving towards our end goal of performance. In parallel, we also have a very rigorous ocean health program. It's one of the natural things people say about ocean-based carbon removal is, hey, we messed up the atmosphere, let's not mess up the ocean. So they want to know that techniques like ours are safe for the ocean. So we actually grow mussels in our outflow in our facility in the port of Los Angeles to show that those mussels are perfectly healthy, breeding, growing, even though they're literally 100% in our outflow, which shows that the outflow from our plants is safe. Combination of those things, some credibility, scientific rigor, a solid plan towards what your end game is, and then, of course, an end game that makes sense. What attracted me to Captura is the fact we have no absorbents, no byproducts. We use only renewable energy in ocean water. When we think about a gigaton sized industry, not having any input material, not having any waste material, using only energy in ocean water really lends itself to large scale adoption. So I think those are the elements that have appealed to investors about Captura. That's hopefully why we're in the final 20 of the XPRIZE, because we have those raw materials.
Another thing that I'm hearing from you too is just the kind of enabling technology that gets built as a byproduct of the core goal that you're after. So, specifically on the electricity input front, I have heard, and you can correct me or you can elaborate, that Captura is doing some pretty innovative things on that side as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what other potential kind of value streams might come from that?
Yes, one of the challenges of technological based carbon removal is you're going to need a lot of energy. No matter what solution you're employing, you're going to need energy. If you need a continuous high level of energy, now you're competing with other users who want to use renewable electricity to decarbonize other areas of the economy. So from the outset with Captura, we wanted to design a solution that allowed us to work with intermittent and off-peak energy. So this is a really interesting part of what we do. Our electrodialysis process, which is one of the core technologies we develop, we can overbuild that and use it to generate acid and base, which is part of our process. That acid and base effectively is storing that energy for us. It's not storing it in the form of energy, but it's storing off-peak energy that otherwise would go unused. Typically in a renewable energy application, maybe 5, 6 hours a day, the wind is blowing or the tide is moving, but nobody wants your energy. Everybody's asleep. So the energy just goes to waste. So what we do is we overbuild our electrodialysis. We run it during those 6 hours a day of off-peak, store it in the form of acid and base, and then run the rest of the plant 24 hours a day with a much, much lower energy use. And that way our costs are lower and I'm not competing. The energy that I use for the peak of my operations was when everybody was asleep. Nobody else wanted it. So that's a core aspect of our architecture. And batteries store energy. We're storing energy in the form of acid and base because that's what we use for our process. It's quite an interesting idea.
It's a core innovation and almost company in itself.
Mhm.
And it's just a building block to the ultimate project of Captura, which I think is both impressive and yet also daunting, given the just fundamental challenge of what you're doing and just how much information you have. And you've been really at the forefront of carbon removal since it became a thing, and things that most of us don't know, things that you can't unsee. With all of that on your shoulders and in your mind, what gives you hope?
Great question. When I started at Carbon Engineering, I remember just before I joined, the company made the first fuel, to my knowledge, anywhere in the world out of atmospheric CO2. Nobody was interested. The story went absolutely nowhere. I think it was page 7 of the local newspaper, and that was as far as it went. Now, here we are 6 years later, only 6 years, it's not that far. And we have a substantial industry forming in carbon removal. There are many different and interesting ideas. Here at the XPRIZE, they divide those into 4 categories: land, ocean, sea, land, ocean, rock, and air. And there was 1,300 applicants for the XPRIZE. So we are seeing a flourishing of ideas now that 4 or 5 years ago didn't exist. Another thing I love about Captura, I'm the old guy on the team. Everybody else is way younger. They're extremely motivated by the mission. They love working towards solutions for this massive problem. So to me, these are the things that bring hope. And I always push back when people say to me, how do you know there's going to be enough energy to do this in 30 years' time? We got 30 years to solve that problem. When we apply bright minds and really interest people in working in the field, great things happen. So for me, that's what gives me hope. I see so much progress just in 6 years compared to when I started in this industry.
Can I just ask one more follow up question to that? I agree with you that we're only as good as our talent within any organization or even within a movement. What do you think are the drivers to that? Is it there being enough money within an industry that people can see themselves building a career here and it's the pursuit of fortune? Is it the idea that I can make an impact? Is it a surface area to exercise one's intellectual ambition? And how do we really get that out there more? When you speak to your younger team members who are passing up other incredible opportunities to come and join Captura, what are those core motivators for them? And how do we amplify that so that it's many more people? You're saying there's this acceleration that you've seen, which is really exciting, but it clearly needs to be probably like 50 or 100x.
Yeah. So what I find when I talk to young people who are coming into this industry, I talk to them about you have an opportunity to truly make a difference on a global scale. And that's an opportunity that very few people get in their lifetime. Whether that's technology, because they come up with a fantastic widget of some description, whether it's they're the ones who tell the story successfully, the ones who put together the financing, the ones who make the projects work, and there's so many different skill sets required. So I find that's the number one thing. Here you can make a difference. And as we see a transition in the workforce towards the millennials and generation, what are we up to? Y or Z? I forget which one we're up to now. But as those people come into the workforce, meaning in their job becomes more and more important. Financially, I don't think there hasn't been a lot of significant exits in the carbon removal space so far. I genuinely think maybe only carbon engineering has had a financial exit that people can look at and see. I think it's good. I hope people look at that and are motivated to realize they can make a good return in this business if they're an investor or an employee with stock options. But no, I see technical interest because there is a wide range: oceanographers, soil scientists, electrochemists, people who deal with ocean currents and water circulation. All of these people are contributing towards carbon removal solutions. So a wide span of backgrounds can apply to this problem. And then you're working on the number one challenge facing society today. There's the old adage of youngsters going back to their granddads and saying, "What did you do during the war?" I imagine in 40 years' time, that will be a question our respective children or grandchildren ask of us. For me personally, being able to say, "Hey, I think I did my bit," that's the biggest motivator.
Yeah, it strikes me that we are all the Steve Jobs generation. And by that, I'm referring to the 2005 Stanford commencement
Right.
speech
Yeah.
that Steve Jobs gave. I was in that audience. That was my graduation year that he gave. I think it was 1 month after his successful surgical treatment for his
Right.
pancreatic cancer. So it was a certain color to that. And this message that we really have no time to waste because we never know when that's going to be us. And we should be doing things that we really care about. I think that was still a very novel message that has now mainstreamed and is influencing an entire generation and then the next generation after that. So I think you're absolutely right. And it's a really exciting moment. If you could just share with our listeners out here who are both operators, founders, potential founders, VCs, and increasingly, and this is our hope and our aim, asset allocators, whom we want to move in large droves off the sidelines. Just one parting thought on why you think carbon removal and climate intervention more broadly is here to stay and also an area worth putting some risk behind. What would you tell them?
Yeah. My personal view of the carbon removal market is this market will become a commodity market in the same way an oil and gas market exists today, for example. And it's due to the necessity. It's as simple as that. It's also a market that will be global, and there will be areas of the world that are able to do it better than others. If you can sequester or you have the right soil or the right geology, you will be able to build a business in carbon removal. I also use the oil and gas analogy in one other area for the finance people. If I'm an investor in oil and gas, we all know that the price of oil and gas go up and down all the time. So if you're investing into that space, you always look to find the lowest cost of production so that you can survive the bad times and you do well in the good times. I advise anybody who's looking at carbon removal to have the same mindset. What are the technologies or the approaches that can achieve scale at low cost? And it may take 5 years for them to get there or whatever, but what are the fundamentals that allow you to do that in your technology or your approach? If you find those and back those, I think you're backing the major companies of 20, 30 years from now. This sector will become as big as the energy sector. I genuinely believe that. And it's the companies that have that key ability of large scale, low cost. Those are the ones to back.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for listening to Climate on the Edge. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and consider dropping us a 5-star rating and review. You can also follow us on social media so you never miss an update. Climate on the Edge is brought to you by Emergence, innovative minds exploring climate's next frontier. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.